Greetings. Welcome to a discussion on the Ten Commandments as a political theology. Today we're going to discuss the commandment, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. To begin the discussion, we're going to look at the place of the commandment in the ancient world, New Testament times. No other nation in the world at that time had a commandment about the Sabbath day. No other nation at that time ever considered, through law or ordinances or statutes, to give their people a day off once a week. The reasoning was we needed to take care of our responsibilities 7 days, care for animals, care for the farm, care for. It just didn't make any sense that a day off would happen and that people would just stay home and do nothing. And yet, the Hebrews, the Israelites, God said to them, you're going to have a day off a week, you're going to have a Sabbath. And so what we are talking about today, back in the day, was extremely rare, because Israel was the only one who had a commandment concerning the Sabbath. Now the commandment is extremely long, and so let me read it to you, and then we'll talk about some of the insides of the commandment. And the commandment is, observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, or your son, or your daughter, or your male or female slave, or your ox, or your donkey, or any of your livestock, or the resident alien in your towns, so that your male and female slave may rest as well as you. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. I think that in order to understand this commandment, we need to become acquainted with and learn how to interpret two words. And the two words are, first, to remember. It is easy to forget something when you get totally absorbed in an activity. God's people can get involved and really become involved in numerous numbers of activity in caring for the community and caring for protection and caring for a whole bunch of activities. And when you become involved deeply in something else, it's easy to forget that you were supposed to do something, or you're supposed to be someplace, or something was going to happen. And so the commandment recognizes that daily routines and being absorbed in things can often make you forget. So it raises the issue, remember, and find some mechanism to make you remember that the seventh day of the week is a day that is going to be different from all of the other days. Remembering is a key component to this commandment. The second word is holy. Holy means to be separate. It means to be set apart. It's meant to mean to be different. When we talk about God, we say God is holy. That means God is set apart. God is different than us. And the Bible continually tells us that God is different, that God is not a part of creation. God is the creator and creation is the product of God's creation. They are two separate entities. And we are told again in Scripture that God and God's people are two separate entities. Oh yes, there can be a very good, close relationship, a loving relationship, a give and take relationship. But God doesn't have parts of little God sitting inside of us. God is separate. God is different than we are. If we are to understand this commandment, we have to understand that we need to remember, we need to somehow not get so absorbed in the things that we do that we forget. And we also need to recognize that holy means this day is going to be different than all of the other days of the week. A number of years ago, too many years ago, I learned about a time management model. And I think that we can extend this model beyond just time management to energy management or to interest management, but it's a way to understand how we use our time and our energies, our skills and our abilities. And I also think that this model is a perfect way to look at this commandment to remember the Sabbath day and to keep it holy. This model has 4 uses of time. The first use of time is we use our time for what is urgent and what is important. For example, in the ministry of God's church, there are 4 primary ministries that must be attended to on a very regular basis. If they're not attended to regularly, there will be dissonance within the congregation, or the congregation will plateau, or the congregation might even decline. And those 4 ministries are: 1, worship; 2, to care for God's people, especially members of the congregation; 3, to manage and be concerned about the assets of the congregation, especially the financial assets which become supports for ministries; and 4, reaching out into the local community to serve those who are outside of our church. All 4 are extremely important, and all 4 are needed in a congregation. And so we spend our time each day of the week in 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 of those activities to make sure a congregation is vital and it is healthy. We would say that this is urgent and this is important. The second use of time is urgent but not important. Let me explain how this type use of time worked in my ministry. When I was a pastor at Good Shepherd Lutheran Church, I used to stay in my office and keep the door open for people to just come and to visit. In Cincinnati at the time, there were business corporations that gave their employees time off on national holidays which were not observed by everyone. I think of Veterans Day. And on Veterans Day, there was always 1 or 2 or 3 people I could count to come to the office without any agenda, without any proposals, without asking for anything, walk in, see my door open, knock on the door, and then sit down. And sometimes they would actually say, "I have the day off, I'm killing time, so I've come to talk to you." Now, some of those conversations were very good conversations, and they were great conversations. And we got close, and there's only positive things to say about them. But I might have been working on worship, or I might have been working on connecting with people, or I might have been working on financing and stewardship and raising funds, or I might have been working at how do we reach the people outside of this church. Now, compared to what I was doing at my desk, that conversation was urgent. The executive was sitting in a chair in my office, but not as important as what I was doing. It's amazing how much time urgent but not important takes up in the life of the church, in the life of the leadership of the church. The third use of time is not urgent and not important. Now, this is not used very often, but it is there. Committees, church leaders, people in the church occasionally have a day when they really do not want to work, they do not want to do what they're supposed to do, they are just tired and they need some time off, but they also feel that they have to be at the office, they have to be doing the church's work. With no enthusiasm at all, but that's what's on the agenda. Well, this is a perfect day to really look busy like you're doing something very important, and the church really needs this to happen, like cleaning out the attic over the sanctuary. Or there's that file cabinet that needs to be cleaned out. I mean, there's material in there that we haven't looked at for 20 years. I can tell you my not urgent and not important was to clean up the desktop on my computer and to put things actually in files and rename the files. And after the morning I said, boy, I got a lot done, and in the afternoon I couldn't find anything that I refiled or renamed. But every leader, every committee needs to have in mind one thing for that occasional day, which is not urgent and not important, but they feel like they need to do something. Now, the final use of time is for what's not urgent, but important. And in the terms of the commandment, this is the Sabbath for the church. This is the Sabbath for the administration of the church. This is the Sabbath where things can happen that don't happen in the other three areas. Those other three areas are for the 6 days of the week. But this area is for that special day. Now, the Sabbath is for recreation, and the Sabbath is for reflection. On the Sabbath, the commandment tells us that we are to reflect on what God has done for us. The Sabbath is a time to take stock, to look back and to say, where has God been a part of our life, our ministry in the last week, the last month, the last year? It's a time to evaluate about what is good and what has been very effective and what seems to be lagging, strengths and weaknesses. And it is also a time when we begin to ask, what is God's preferred future for our church? Now, it's very easy on those other three time uses to get so absorbed in them that we forget to put on our calendars. We forget to mark on our iPhones. We forget to somehow write notes to us saying, we need a Sabbath. We need time to reflect. We need time to see where God is calling us in the future. The Sabbath day is a part of all that we do. And if we don't observe it, we have some real problems and real trouble in maintaining a vital and an alive congregation. Now, I think it's a fair question to ask, why do we forget the Sabbath? Again, I'm going to go back and say, we forget when we get absorbed in everything else. But here are three reasons that I think contribute greatly into why we forget the Sabbath. And the first is the responsibilities of the other 6 days of the week are just overwhelming sometimes. In fact, they can seem overwhelming every week. I mean, we need to attend to what's urgent and important, and we need to some basis, deal with what is urgent and what is not important. You can't just throw those away. And so we look at the schedule, we look at the calendar, we look at what's on our desks, and we say, as a leader of God's people, I just don't have time for the Sabbath now. The second reason that we forget the Sabbath is that things are going well. Peter Drucker, who was the guru of business organizations in the 20th century, and then became the guru of nonprofit organizations at the end of the 20th century going into the 21st century. And Peter Guru, with all of his experience in profit and nonprofit organizations, would say, the greatest cause of failure is success. When things are really going well, when things seem to be very effective, when we're succeeding in meeting our goals, who needs time? Who needs a Sabbath to look at the future? Who needs a Sabbath to say, this is what we're going to be 5 years from now or 10 years from now? Who needs a Sabbath to figure out whether we can reach people in a new and more effective way in the name of Jesus? Very successful congregations really have to work hard to say, we better get to our Sabbath so we continue to grow and we continue to minister in Jesus' name. And then the third reason is that reflecting on the present and predicting and discerning what God is calling to us in the future is time-consuming. This is not an hour in the office sitting down saying, okay, this is what I've got to be doing. This is not necessarily a weekend retreat. There's a lot of effort and a lot of study that goes into taking a Sabbath, reflecting, evaluating, seeing the future. And yet it is extremely important that the Sabbath is maintained, held, remembered in every congregation. Now, before we end and before you go off to do the things you want to do, and I go off to do the things that I need to do, let's answer a few questions to keep the conversation going until we meet again. And the first question is, what were the surprises in the presentation? Were you surprised that the Sabbath was unique at the time of the Old Testament? Were you surprised that the Sabbath is for reflection, of seeing where God has been in our lives in the past and where God is seen in the life of God's people in the future? Were there any surprises? If so, what were they? If there were any new insights, what were they? Were you surprised that using a model for time management is also a way to discern the need for a Sabbath for your congregation or denomination, or for the work that you're doing in God's name in some other place? Were there any statements in what I said that makes you want to challenge them? to say, no, that's not what the Sabbath is. No, that's not where we go, and that's not what we do. And finally, if you are having a conversation with somebody who is not watching this presentation with you, what's one thing, one thing, you would want to tell them? Thank you for being here. Hope to see you when we get together next time.